Good morning, campers, and welcome to Radio Camp Half-Blood, a Percy Jackson read-along podcast. I'm B.
Yar, and I'm Zack.
Oh, no.
Shiver me timbers, B.
We read Chapter 19, The Council Gets Cloven.
Yar, yes, they certainly did. It was like
You're going to talk like a pirate the whole time.
Straw man in the hurricane during a wake. I don't know. This is Talk Like a Pirate Day.
You're getting a little away from yourself there.
Sorry, I was getting like really into character. But yeah, today we read Chapter 19, The Council Gets Cloven. And what a depressing chapter.
Yeah, it was a very somber, I guess, is the tone you would ascribe to this chapter. I guess it makes sense. It's like post-battle, even though they technically won, there are some dead people. They're kind of inconsequential dead people, and even Percy kind of says that, where he's like, yeah, someone died. I didn't really know his name.
Yeah, we'll end up talking about it because there's a lot of interesting details when it comes to the death of a character, even if they are super minor, and it's interesting what we'll end up talking about because it's much like an old wench looking in her widow's peak, waiting for his man to come back from the sea.
You guys need to understand that I went to close my window, and when I came back, Zack was singing a sea shanty, to which I replied, "Are you singing a sea shanty?" And he said, "You can't prove that I was." He was. Listeners, he was.
Yar. No, I'm not going to be doing Talk Like a Pirate Day all day. I already got my Krispy Kreme donuts. I didn't have to wear a puffy shirt. And it was great, and I loved it, and everything's awesome.
Wait, you get free Krispy Kreme if you dress like a pirate?
And you speak like a pirate, yeah, a Krispy Kreme.
Oh man,
You get a free dozen.
that'd be awesome.
I had some friends that when Assassin's Creed Black Flag was coming out, they all had like their super pirate cosplays, and they went to a Krispy Kreme during Talk Like a Pirate Day, and they got like 6 boxes of 2 dozen donuts.
Wow. I don't even know where a Krispy Kreme is.
It's like a rare commodity because you guys have your Dunkin' and it's terrible and gross, and I like my Krispy Kreme.
I think Krispy Kreme's probably better. The Dunkin' Donuts, the donuts are okay. I worked there. They were okay. When they're fresh, they're better. By the end of the day, they're kind of depressing. But we could take as many munchkins as we wanted, which is great. Just shoving that into that carton. The carton holds 50 if you don't try hard and believe in yourself. But you can make it hold more. You can fit as many munchkins as, I don't know, you can fit like maybe 80 munchkins in a carton like that. They're not good. They're old and stale, but...
When you say munchkins, I'm thinking of you stuffing, like, the munchkins from the Wizard of Oz.
Of, like, the people from Munchkinland? No.
Quiet, you munchkins. We're gonna go to the Lollipop Guild.
Yeah, not the Lollipop Guild. I'm talking about the donut holes.
So this chapter is really more of a mixed bag than I ever thought possible. And it's interesting because out of all the Percy Jackson books, this is my least read. So I had forgotten all about the Dionysus stuff. And it's really interesting.
Oh, yeah, that stuff. A lot happens with Dionysus this chapter, actually. Well, we'll get into it.
Yeah, it's a very diegetic Dionysus chapter.
I wouldn't necessarily say that this is like a redemption arc for Dionysus, but he is uncharacteristically nice.
Actually, I kind of think it's more of a redemption arc, but it just gives humanity to a god, which is interesting.
Right, it makes him a little bit more well-rounded. He's still kind of a jerk, but...
That's just his character. That's just his personality. You don't see, like, Ares doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, here he's a somewhat helpful jerk.
So this chapter opens up, and a bunch of people are dead. And I'm just going to read it because the way that Rick Riordan introduces this chapter within the first 10 seconds, even less than a paragraph, is interesting. That night was the first time I actually saw a camp burial shroud used on bodies, and it was not something I wanted to ever see again. Among the dead was Lee Fletcher from the Apollo cabin. He had been downed by a giant's club. He was wrapped in a golden shroud without any decoration. The son of Dionysus, who'd gotten down fighting an enemy half-blood, was wrapped in a dead purple shroud embroidered with grapevines. His name was Castor. I had seen him around camp for 3 years and never even bothered to learn his name. He'd be 17 years old. His twin brother Pollux tried to say a few words, but he choked up and just took the torch. He lit the funeral pyre in the middle of the amphitheater. Within seconds, the row of shrouds was engulfed in fire, sending smoke and sparks up into the stars. Wow!
Yeah, let's just start on a nice, light, airy note.
God, this party is so lit. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, I'm here all day.
Oh god, yep. That pun just sort of washed over me in the worst way. Yeah, this is a pretty bummer way to open a chapter. It's weird because on the one hand they literally say well, this character wasn't that important. You, reader, probably don't even remember this character, but he did die. Well, I guess two people, because they also talk about Lee Fletcher.
Yeah, they do talk about him, and it's unique because I actually do have a story about this where it's weird how you can remember the people's names even though you don't bother to learn them. Like when someone's passed away, like in my senior year, there was someone that sat behind me in economics, and this guy, big guy, I didn't really know him all that well, but he did sit behind me, and a week before graduation, actually might have been 2 weeks, he went skateboarding, and he was like the person that, you know what, let's tie a bungee cord to me and go as fast as you can. He hit his head on the pavement. And 3 days later, he was dead. Everyone knew who he was. Like, I know his name now. Like, it's something that will never leave my brain. His name was Justin Moore. You take life for granted in this way, where Percy Jackson had been in camp for so many years and didn't even bother to know this guy's name, even though technically they're all related in some way, shape, or form.
I do think there's a subtle message there about the way that maybe Percy sometimes gets myopic in the way that he focuses on his own.
He has his own clique
and his own his own clique, but also just in general his own problems. Like he's very focused on the complicated nature of his own family and friends and whatever, and then sometimes I don't think he realizes the complex nature of, let's say, the random campers that he saw around camp, or even someone like Clarice. We'll get into it later about Clarice and God, what's his name now?
Chris Rodriguez.
Chris Rodriguez. The way that she had her own struggles and battle that she had to face, and she was dealing with interpersonal stuff that maybe Percy didn't really know about until this book. So yeah, a lot of this chapter does focus on maybe other people's stories and not as much about him. We talk about Dionysus and his children. We talk a little bit about Grover. There's some stuff about Clarice. There's some stuff about Nico. There's a lot of other extraneous character stuff that maybe Percy, it fell by the wayside to him, and then he's like, oh, right, yeah, I guess this other stuff is happening with people.
Yes, and it's also, now we're getting into more of the darker territories. We're seeing, what war does to people, as well as collateral damage, what happens. Lee Fletcher pretty much gets hit in the face by a club. You don't see it, but you can imagine what it possibly would look like.
Yeah, that's pretty gruesome.
Yes, and it shows the stakes again, but here's something that I've noticed both in Harry Potter, but also Percy Jackson now, is that they are killing kids, but technically they're all teenagers, because there's this weird past. The second they get to 13, yeah, we can kill them, but if they're 12, 10, 11, can't do any of that.
Yeah, child murder is fine as long as they're a teen.
Yeah, which is weird if you think about it, because all these people they talk about are over the age of 15. I'm going to assume Lee Fletcher is a little older, because
around that age.
Around that age, yeah. So it's perfectly okay to kill them because it's a tragedy, but also having a burial and also having a pyre is a very, it's a ceremonial thing.
Yeah, that's a very visceral description of setting these shrouds on fire and then watching everything get engulfed in flames. That's a pretty upsetting. I mean, I guess whatever is the traditional ancient Greek way to do things, and that's why they do it at camp, but it's sort of whoa, okay, let's just set fire to everything.
Isn't it ashes to ashes, dust to dust?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the symbology of it, but it is a very upsettingly evocative image to start the chapter on.
Well, yes, and that's the strong imagery you need. I'm going to use Star Wars as an example of this, as setting a fire. In Star Wars, if you're a Jedi and you die, and for some reason you don't become a Force ghost, they set your body aflame. You got Qui-Gon, you got Darth Vader. The only person you don't get is Obi-Wan. It's almost like it's a hero's burial is having them be set on fire and their ashes scattered to the winds.
I think back to last chapter, and we did have a lot of criticisms about the way that the battle was portrayed. I think it's funny that this chapter is really, a lot of it's the aftermath of the battle, but I think it's handled better. I think Rick Riordan for whatever reason, like the stakes of the battle seem complicated, and we've talked for an entire episode about all their gripes with the battle, but then the actual aftermath feels very grounded in, stakes, and they feel interesting and important, and they actually go, oh, well, here's this character that you might not know, but let's remind you that they're a person and remind you that they have their own issues that they have to deal with. And like that, for instance, one of the Dionysus kids died and he had a twin brother, so then him grieving that, it felt a little bit more grounded emotionally than the last chapter did, and that was kind of an interesting surprise because they're very connected. Obviously, it's like the battle and then the aftermath of the battle, but I like this chapter a lot more.
And then that's more again of the Harry Potter analogy where you have Fred and George, and now you have the Dionysus twins.
Oh, God, yeah. It's very similar to Fred and George, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that gets me where I live when one twin dies and the other doesn't. Like, why do you have to come for me like this, Rick Riordan?
Well, to be fair, B, every mirror is the mirror of Erised in a twin's eyes.
Ah, jeez. Why do you have to say these things that hurt me so?
Because I'm a great human being. I wake up every morning, cry myself in the shower, and then put on my shoes like every other sane person.
Yep, and then you say horrible, sad things about twins dying. Yeah.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. It was great this week. So my parents watched Mindhunter, and they're like, my dad was like, I'm going to start profiling you, see if you aren't a serial killer. So one of the nights, it was like midnight, and I had come home, and I was like still wearing my boots and stuff, and my parents were sleeping, so I walked up to their room and just stood there.
Oh, no.
And my dad woke up and was like, what the hell are you doing? And I was like, I need some rope. I have a sudden urge. Just looked at him.
Oh, my God.
And my dad just looked at me and went right back to bed.
Messing with your parents.
And then I asked him in the morning, so would you be more angry if I got blood on the car or had a dead body? And quite frankly, I'd be more upset that you got blood on the car because I'd have to clean it.
Anyway, you're incredibly stable.
Oh, I'm stable. I'm as stable as an earthquake.
You're a stable genius.
But going back on the track about this is that I think this opening is very strong. It's weird because in the Battle of Labyrinth, this is considered probably one of the darker books, but a lot of the problems I have with this book is most of it till you get to the ending where everything starts to come together, and this is where the book really does work. The first parts of this book don't quite, but here is where I enjoyed a lot more because we're actually seeing the aftermath. We have the big old grand adventure of the first three books. The first three books are a big grand adventure, but now this is where we see the consequences of everyone's actions.
My feelings about this book, I mean, we'll probably talk about this more when we finish it completely.
When we wrap up with it.
But yeah, I don't dislike it or across the board like it. I think a lot of the chapters were hit or miss. Some were I really, really loved. Some were great. Maybe some of my favorite chapters happened in this book, a lot of really interesting stuff with the characters. And then there'd be a chapter that wasn't as engaging or was written in a weird sort of way that I mean, obviously we have episodes that detail my feelings on each of the chapters, but it's kind of, yeah, I didn't feel as
As invested?
No, I mean, I was invested. I think what I mean to say is the first three books were consistently pretty good, while I felt this book had more kind of out there chapters that I wasn't too happy about, but also had more really up there interesting character stuff that were some of my favorite chapters. So it was really highs and lows. You know what I mean?
So the best way to put this, if I'm trying to understand this, is the first three books were just all chocolate chip cookies. And then this book, it was I'm going to take a big old bite of this chocolate chip cookie. And you realize that, oh no, I've accidentally mixed chocolate chip and raisins in this cookie. So sometimes you have chocolate chips and sometimes you have raisins.
I mean, that sounds pretty good. I'd eat a chocolate chip raisin cookie. That sounds fine to me. It's more like trail mix. Sometimes you get a raisin, sometimes you get a chocolate chip.
Oh man, this sounds making me hungry. But you see what the analogy is. There's a lot of
This is making me hungry. But you know what I mean. I don't think that this book is any better or worse than the other ones, but I think it's just not as consistent. That might have to do with the changing of the themes and the way that the plot is progressing. Things are getting more intense.
It follows the same type of flaws that Goblet of Fire has, and then it goes into Order of the Phoenix.
Right. Yeah, well, it's very similar in a lot of ways. Like, even Goblet of Fire has a maze in it. Like, there's some parallels for sure. There's a character that's like, Castor is like Cedric. He's like a guy who went to your camp or school who you didn't know that well, but he dies really tragically or whatever. Like, there's a lot of like similar beats.
And technically he was the one that won the Triwizard Tournament, but because Harry Potter was there, Harry Potter automatically wins.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yes. Well, it's also when it comes to authors like this, I feel like
By the way, this is a complete sidebar, but I had to bring this up. The other day, me and Sarah were talking about the different Harry Potter cover arts that exist. And the one for Goblet of Fire, like I think the US one, is totally bonkers. Like if you just get a chance to look at it's just like, because it's not like...
Oh no, I seen it. That's my favorite copy.
Chronologically... like it doesn't make any sense like chronologically because it's all happening at once. Like on one page there's like a dragon and it's just really weird what's happening in that. First of all, the dragon in it doesn't even really look like a dragon. It's just sort of like this tail of spikes that's in front of Harry, which doesn't really make sense because he's holding the egg that he gets from that dragon. And then like Victor Crumb is like kind of peering out behind him. It's bonkers. It's truly like the craziest book cover ever.
For a person that has never read Harry Potter, I like how you know every character.
Listen, I've culturally just absorbed it through YA lit osmosis. I know more about Harry Potter than I should. And I know all the movies and stuff. But yeah, I also know like children's book illustration to some extent because I'm friends with illustrators and because I'm into children's book and art. But God, that just was like cracking me up how like completely inconsistent and crazy it is. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, you should like just do a Google and be like, oh yeah, why did I find that normal? That's a really odd design.
Something that I've noticed, especially when it comes to J.K. Rowling and Rick Riordan, when it comes to how they start off having young characters and they age up, is there's weird almost like transition where they don't quite know, like, okay, are they kids or teenagers? I mean, Percy in this is 15. Let's just use Harry's 15 at the same point, and how both Order of the Phoenix and this book are almost tonally inconsistent because I'm going to take a guess and say J.K. Rowling and Rick Riordan both probably had teenagers, but they didn't have teenagers of this age yet, or they were just getting there, so they didn't quite understand like what it was like, and they pulled from their own viewpoints of like what it was like as a teenager, but because all those mixed together, it's like dark and broody and sad, and it's weird.
Yeah, it's when they get to their angst.
Yeah, when they get to their angst and they start pulling in from like your 16 years, your 17 years, your 18 years, they all like mold together, and it's weird because there's this weird tonal inconsistency in this book where Percy is this one way, but then he kind of starts to change, but also because he's a teenager and has to have all these problems as a teenager, you have to have these teenager problems, and it's weird because you have that transition from being smaller kids to teenagers, and there's that weird like tonal inconsistency that comes with this, like, okay, we're changing from kids to adults now, but then the readers like reading it get whiplash, especially if you're reading these books very quickly and you're binge reading these, where it's just like you almost get whiplash.
Yeah, it's interesting because like it's any series that's functions in this way, and I guess you could even rope in Unfortunate Events, though it's like very different because that takes place over a shorter period of time, I think, and it starts out dark in a different way, so it's not as comparable. But I do think like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson very much follow a similar trajectory of like they're longer book series, they take place over a longer period of time, they really show characters growing from like young adolescents to like older teenagers, and that also goes along with like the plot getting really, really complicated, and maybe that also has to do with things like being based in magic and stuff, so like the stakes are always escalating, the magic is always getting more powerful, the villain is always getting more powerful, so like, and therefore, you know, people can die, whatever. Like it's kind of a similar style of writing, I think, like this long form children's book series style of writing. It's weird though because there is always like a sort of tipping point where you're like, oh, this is getting really dark, and probably like maybe this is it. Maybe this is like the turning point because there's like 5 books. So this is the second to last.
For Harry Potter, I think the catalyst is either, you know, Cedric dying or Sirius Black dying. It's either
Like
it's
a
in
loss of
between
innocence
that
kind
weird
of thing.
area, like the loss of innocence. Yes, but in Percy Jackson, we have had people die before. Even in Harry Potter, we've had people die before.
It's different context, I think, right?
Yeah, it's different context, but also it also has to do with like characters changing fundamentally. Like here are their principles, but also because they have hormones and stuff. Like how do those get changed and warped?
Right. Yeah, they're not as like carefree as they were because they're not children, which is a different thing because in some ways it was scarier when they were kids because they had like less agency, but then as they get more agency, they get more responsibility and blah blah blah. Yeah, it's really funny that this is happening just after I had the conversation about Goblet of Fire with Sarah because they are kind of comparable books. I obviously didn't read the book, but I did watch the movie, have a general idea of like what kind of emotional beat it plays.
Well, it's the movie where everyone didn't get a haircut.
Yeah, it's the movie where everyone has like the weird shaggy hair. I guess that has a lot to do with the year that it was filmed, but there's something interesting about, I think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm getting all of my Harry Potter knowledge secondhand, but that's like after Cedric dies, then Harry sees Thestrals, which apparently you can see, but only like after you see someone die, and it's like complicated because like his parents did die, so like he's just noticing it? It's like a complicated thing, but it definitely represents a specific type of loss of innocence. Like it's pretty heavy-handed, and it's a similar thing here.
Okay, so for the people that are about to like murder me, including Sarah, I was like, wait, that seems like a plot point that doesn't make sense. Is Harry, he sees his parents dying, but he's a baby, so he doesn't comprehend death. That's why he can't see the Thestrals.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's a different thing.
As a kid, you're not going to understand what death is. Even as a small child, you'll be like, my parents went to sleep. They're just not waking up.
Yeah, I also think that there's a specific type of loss of innocence in these kinds of books that happen when like a peer dies, like the way that this character is fulfilling a Cedric role in the same way, where it's like, it's not...
But these people aren't Cedric roles. That's the problem. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, they're not quite as involved in the plot, obviously, because he's just like a more of a tertiary character instead of like a secondary character.
I get, maybe it's probably better to compare this to Deathly Hallows, like the final battle where they start having the bodies pile up.
Right. I mean, it's comparable to that too. You can't exactly do a one-to-one thing because they're less books in a series, so like the emotional beats aren't exactly the same, but like there are some things that serve similar purposes. I do think that there's like a specific way that like seeing a like non-integral character die somehow is more or it's not more upsetting, but it's sort of like, oh, this isn't just the plot happening. There's also all these like
it's collateral damage.
What's the word? Like innocent. Yeah, exactly. Collateral damage. There's something about seeing the collateral damage of like the wider stakes. Maybe that's it too. It's like Percy isn't just worried about him or just worried about maybe Annabeth, or sometimes it's Grover, like his little group. He's worried about the camp as a whole, and that kind of escalates things too. It's not just like, oh, well, this is my own personal weird thing that I'm having like a fight with Zeus because he thinks I stole the lightning bolt or whatever. Now it's like the friggin' Titans are being awoken and there's like a giant war against the gods. Like it's escalating, and emotionally it's escalating too.
Now here's the thing I want to talk to you about is it better that a minor character like this dies, or would you have liked to have had the satisfaction of like a Chiron or a Clarice or even an Annabeth dying in the battle?
I don't know. I mean, I think it would have been maybe more interesting if there was like more of a threat of like a mortal injury in the last chapter, like not necessarily that they die, but you think they might. That might have made the battle chapter a little bit more interesting. But as far as the way that this is written, I actually do like the choice to pick a sort of like out there character, because then, I mean, they acknowledge that he's quote unquote not that important, and therefore they kind of recenter this idea of like, oh, well, you're not integral to the story, because then you're not an important character, therefore you're not an important person. Like, it's still sad that he dies. You know what I'm saying?
This is the brilliance of Rick Riordan in this way. Is he might not seem important to Percy Jackson, but heck, he's damn important to Dionysus.
Exactly. Which also then Dionysus comes back in this chapter, which we'll talk about, and that also contextualizes some of the things he does later in the chapter and his, weird out of character behavior.
And it's weird because like when it comes to this, I think people get the stigma of when you kill off a minor character, it's like a red shirt you kill in Star Trek. This is a little different because they do have names, but also it's more like you're killing the camp almost, where you have like your stock characters, but you think of the camp. Obviously, Camp Half-Blood is a character on itself. So by killing some of the population off, you're realizing, oh wait, our way of life is completely threatened by killing off a minor character. It's a lot harder.
Right, exactly. Like he doesn't. The death of God, I keep forgetting his name and wanting to say Pollux. It's the other one. Lee Fletcher.
Or Castor.
No, Lee Fletcher is sort of more of like the Cedric character in my brain for some reason, but then Castor is the twin. But either way, both of them, I don't know, it's kind of interesting that they aren't necessarily like integral to Percy's day-to-day life, but he sort of took them for granted, and then that represents a loss of like a culture in a way. Like he's not just, even though that he doesn't personally know them and doesn't feel like the loss of like, oh no, I'm grieving this specific person, it's still like, yeah, he's still grieving like this idea that he always expected to see them there and now he can't, and that like represents something bigger about the way that the camp is threatened.
Well, I think it's more like he's misjudging, like, oh, of course no one in our camp's going to die, like we're the heroes.
Right, well there's that too of like the false sense of security and all of that, and then like that's another thing too, is a lot of the more dangerous things that have happened in these books have happened in faraway places that weren't at camp. And camp was sort of the safe home base where we returned to at the end of every book, where things were usually pretty safe. I mean, there was that time, obviously, in the Sea of Monsters where they're trying to get the Golden Fleece back, so they're trying to protect the camp, and like there's some threats to the borders of safety that they have, but for the most part it like represents a certain status quo, like a safe place they can go to that's not like the outside world where they're always under threat. And so I think there's a specific sense of danger and loss that comes from losing someone within the borders of the camp.
Well, yes, because most of the people who have died so far have been away from camp. The only one that was close was Thalia, where she gets turned into the tree. We have Bianca, she dies in the junkyard of the gods. You have Zoe, who technically isn't a demigod, but, you know, she dies by her parents' hand. And then you have just minor characters that we hear about just dying or disappearing. But this is the first time you have someone dying on camp grounds, which is supposed to have like a magical border. Thus, oh, it's supposed to protect us. It's our force field. Well, they got into the force field. What happens now?
There's one line that Percy says when he follows Nico. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but just this quote is interesting in the context of what we're talking about. He says, when he's following Nico into the woods, he says, "As I passed under the shadow of the trees, I realized how dark it was getting. I'd never been scared in the forest before, though I knew there were plenty of monsters. Still, I thought about yesterday's battle, and I wondered if I'd ever be able to walk in those woods again without remembering the horror of so much fighting." I kind of just wish that they had, like, more of a literal therapeutic process that they could go through. Like, I guess they have Chiron as, like, a mentor to go to. A mentor centaur.
A mentor. Oh.
Yeah, a mentor.
But even when it comes to...
Not to be confused with a Dementor, then we're back to Harry Potter, but...
Oh no, Percy, watch out. He's going to suck your soul right out of your body.
Exactly. Yeah, I wonder how that would work for a demigod. Anyway.
Well, they still have souls like the other people. I think the only people that don't are like monsters. Like Grover doesn't have a soul. Even though he can be reincarnated as a flower or whatever he wants to be.
This chapter does really reflect on the emotional toll of what these characters are going through too. It doesn't totally dive into it, but there's like little hints of like, oh right, we've been through a lot, you know, that probably messes up your perspective on things. They're children, even though they're older children, they're still children, and they go through these like horrific battles where they see people they know die, and there's all these like very intense responsibilities involving the fate of the world and the gods and everything. Like there's obviously a lot of pressure dealing with that, and sometimes I think you forget, even as a person reading this book, how like that would feel if you were in that situation. Like, oh, if I was like 16 and I had the responsibilities of Percy Jackson, how would that weigh on me? Probably a lot. Honestly, we criticize these campers a lot sometimes and be like, oh, they're being selfish, or they're doing this, or they're being blindsided by this one thing. On the one hand, I understand the criticism. On the other hand, it's like, well, I mean, I don't know if I could have done better. They're kind of dealing with a lot. When I was 16, I was struggling, and I wasn't like fighting monsters with a sword.
Oh man, I'm depressed. You're gonna hand me a sword? well, now I'm depressed and I'm well armed.
Right. I mean, well, Nico's the perfect example of this, right? He's depressed and they're like, all right, time to fight a monster.
Well, no, he's depressed and well armed. Oh my god, is this where like pumped up kicks intensifies for Nico?
Yeah.
Oh no.
We've talked about Nico's emo-ness, obviously.
Well, yeah, and he gets more emo as this chapter goes along. Like the emo meter is at full emo right now. It's at full MCR.
Anyway, so we sort of talked a little bit about the aftermath of the battle. What the chapter is named after is actually not that big of a part of it, but they do talk to the Council of Cloven Elders about the supposed death of Pan because they don't believe it and blah, blah, blah. This is a very frustrating part of the chapter.
I feel like it is, but it also isn't, because the one thing I wanted to talk about before this was that Grover gets a new power. He has panic.
He does, which is, that's a fun object lesson in where the word panic came from.
Yes, yeah, it comes from the word pan and how in the first Titan War.
It's a good excuse to teach kids that.
Yes. Oh, no, it's perfect. But also now he has like god powers. But even when it comes to like the Council of Cloven Elders, it's hard because you're tackling with pretty much reality versus faith at times, where the problem though is you have these elders and they have faith that Pan isn't dead, even though they have all this hard evidence. And it's hard because you can't necessarily, a person with faith is going to believe no matter how strongly the things against them, that they're always going to be hopeful no matter what. Even if there's a bunch of witnesses, they're going to keep calling Grover a heretic. It took Dionysus, a literal god, to tell him to basically shut up and move on.
Right. That is a good power move, though, for him to just appear like that. I feel like even though he does something nice, which is sort of out of character, it is very in character for him to just appear at like an opportune moment in like an outfit that's ridiculous and not appropriate for the situation. Be like, hey, so I have an opinion. Like, that's very Dionysus.
Well, yes. And also, even when it comes to the Council of Cloven Elders, it's a little different compared to Harry Potter or compared to Series of Unfortunate Events where the adults don't believe them. The adults don't want to believe them because what's the alternative? It's like that weird thing. It's like, your god is dead. What do we do now? They never really thought about it. It's different.
Well, it's religious, too. It's a different thing. It's like a because they're not just like, oh, I disregard your opinion because of who you are. It's like, I disregard your opinion because I refuse to believe the truth of it because the consequences are like too like existentially horrifying for me.
Yes,
basically.
Yes, and it's interesting because I like reading Brandon Sanderson. He's a fantasy author who he is a person of faith, and a lot of his books deal with this about what is faith compared to being practical, or what is religion compared to morality. Like, can you be someone of faith but also struggle with having like a difficult situation? Like, can you kill someone that is just, or do you have to follow your rigid religion? Can you bend it? Can you wane it? It's interesting. I love the Stormlight Archives and I love Warbreaker. Read those; they're really great. Even for him, he was a person that he grew up Mormon, and he talks about it. Like, one of his first books is pretty much a person struggling with. One of his main villains in this book called Elantris is like an evil missionary, but in his eyes, he isn't evil. And you get to get into his head and realize, okay, yes, he's evil, but he's doing everything for the wrong way. But why is he like this? Because an army's going to come and kill all these people of the city unless he converts them. And it's an interesting look at this. But here it's a little different because you're looking at faith is a really hard thing to tackle here. And again, Dionysus, a god, has to explain it to them. And even then...
Right, it's almost a split vote, basically.
And obviously you're going to have like this thing where it's like you're going to have now almost like a new religion. You're going to have the people that believe Pan's alive. You're going to have people that believe Pan is dead. You have this problem now. You have
right, like a segmenting of the belief. It's interesting because I do think to some extent it's like maybe an analysis of belief or more specifically religion. But there's also like some sort of metaphorical thing going on where the Council of Cloven Elders represent a group of like the old guard, basically. They're set in their ways. They have a certain set of traditions. They have certain beliefs. And that in some ways makes them absolved of having to do their own work towards like whatever, making the world better, or in this case, like saving the earth and making whatever I forget the exact phrasing, like taking care of the wild, basically. So they're not interested in that. They're interested in looking for Pan because they want the savior. They want someone to do the work for them. And then there's this younger person coming to them and saying, well, actually, this guy who you believe in, who you think is going to swoop in and fix all your problems, he's actually gone. And what he told me was that we actually have to put in the work ourselves. And that's like, that feels very resonant, very like now, or also just in general. I think that's a dynamic of like old versus new, of like older people being set in their ways and being like, oh, well, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to change things. And then a younger person being like, well, actually, I have more stakes in this because this is my future. And you're like not listening to the idea of maybe putting in the work.
Now, this is also a parallel story. You could flip it on the version of it with the gods. Who do you have as Grover now?
What do you mean?
Like, you were pretty much what you said. You have these people stuck in their old way. You have them that don't want to change, and you have someone saying, hey, this is unfair.
Oh, right. So are you comparing him to Luke, you mean?
Yes. And this is pretty much it parallels the exact parallel.
It's a theme.
It's a theme
that runs throughout these books for sure, about the idea of tradition. And it's like, oh, well, are you just doing this because that's what has always been done? Yes.
And isn't tradition just basically ancient peer pressure at times? Isn't that what the story of Mulan is?
Yeah, I do think that there is an argument in these books sometimes about the necessity or like the value of tradition, and also the value in questioning it and going, wait a second, well, just because we've done this since forever doesn't mean it's necessarily good.
Well, tradition comes from a place where it comes from somewhere, like something, there's a reason why people do this, but after so many thousands of years, it's almost like a gigantic game of telephone where people, like, their mom does it a little differently, so now the whole family follows it that way, and it just keeps cascading until it's almost like a perversion of the original version, if that makes any sense. After so many thousands of years, like, you can say, like, the grass is green, but 1,000 years from now, because of miscommunication, the grass is now blue.
Right. Yeah, this is an interesting scene. It's very frustrating. At the very least, we do have Chiron, and we do have Dionysus, who kind of swoops in last minute, is like, hey, listen, I know that you guys respect me a lot. Well, my God vote counts for 2 votes, so I guess we're at an impasse, and we can just, forget
okay,
this
everyone,
ever
get out of
happened.
here. Bye.
Yeah, so that was kind of like a weird scene, because it is what the chapter's named after, but it's sort of like quickly dismissed as like, all right, well, we did a vote, and like there's no one agrees on anything, so I guess
we had your vote.
We're done? I don't exactly know.
Well, we had a vote, but your vote is stupid. My vote's awesome.
Your vote is... The council has elected to ignore this decision, yeah.
I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Yeah, the Adam Savage thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure it comes from somewhere else, but he said it.
We also, in this chapter, do get some dire news that the gods are all turning.
Oh, yeah, that's... Dionysus swoops in... is like, yep, Pan's probably dead. Sounds like something he'd do, which is a very funny way that he's justifying his vote. And then he's like, oh, by the way, all the old gods are like turning, which is kind of like, we already knew that because we knew that Nemesis was on the side of the Titans, but also we find out Morpheus, Hecate, Janus. We knew about Janus, and Zeus knows how many more, to which thunder rumbled in the distance, and then Dionysus said, strike that, even Zeus doesn't know, which is pretty funny.
He's just like, no, shh, be quiet, Dionysus, I don't want to tell him. And it's interesting because now we're having a bigger problem. It has become a war, but more importantly, this is Rick Riordan, I think, because he just loves the Civil War. It has now become a civil war where people are picking sides, brother against brother, father against son. It's the Civil War. Yeah,
definitely. It's pretty obvious, actually, when you think about it. I guess I never contextualized it within, like, the literal Civil War, but it totally makes sense that he would.
Well, he's also a nerd, and I believe that he just has this big love for the Civil War. I'm sure that's what he studied a lot of in college.
It's surprising he hasn't written just a straight-up Civil War book, actually.
Wait, V, just wait.
Yeah, honestly, he's a prolific dude. Who knows? He probably has something in the works.
I have this book idea where I play Rick Riordan. I'm going to be Abraham Lincoln, who's a demigod, and John Wilkes Booth is the son of Hades.
Oh God! I mean, we've discussed the weird thing of being like every famous person was a demigod.
Well, B, if you want a good book version of this, I'm sure like he wrote the book and he's like, I'm going to submit this, and it's going to be Abraham Lincoln, fighting vampires. And then his editor's like, that already exists.
And that's how we got Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer.
Oh my God, I love that movie. It's so bad. And the book's also bad.
I'm sure.
Have you ever watched that? There's parts of that movie that I think about constantly.
No, that's not the sort of thing that I would watch, but I'm sure you're right.
Do you want to hear the dumbest thing about this movie that I think about almost on a daily basis now that someone wrote? So the vampires, in the movie, the vampires are about to win. They have to get to the Battle of Gettysburg because the whole vampire Confederate army is going to be there.
Of course.
So it's like, okay, so
right.
the entire city of Washington, D.C. grabs all their silverware and melts it down into bullets.
Oh, no. Wait, but I thought that was for werewolves.
No, silver can kill vampires, too. They need musket balls. It's a whole.
Okay,
it's holy.
I wasn't sure.
Silver's holy. I'm derailing this, but this makes sense, and this is going to be a good derail. So pretty much, they know that the wires are going to be tapped, so they pretty much put, hey, so we're going to have the train shipment to Gettysburg of all these bullets, and Abraham Lincoln's going to be on top of the train, making sure that no vampires get this box, okay?
Oh my God.
And Abraham Lincoln starts fighting all these vampires. The vampires defeat Abraham Lincoln and get into the train car and realize it's booby-trapped. And one of the vampires is like, you said it was going to be on the railway. And it's like, you thought it was going to be on a train. And then it cuts to the Underground Railroad.
Oh my God.
It's the Underground Railroad that delivered all these bullets.
No. Zach, why? Why did they do this to me? Okay, so we found something even dumber than saying that every historical figure is a demigod, is saying that every historical figure helped Abraham Lincoln the Vampire Slayer. That's even dumber.
No, the Underground Railroad is an actual railroad.
Wait, no, so it's an actual train?
No, there's a part in the movie where
a
bunch of slaves are walking down the road. And they're pretty much the vampires ignore them because they see the train off in the distance and they don't put two and two together.
I can never get that part of my brain back.
Well, that was the ultimate derail, B, because the train gets derailed in that movie.
Of course. Yep. You did it.
Sorry, I just had to bring this up because where else am I going to talk about this dumbest scene ever in the movie?
No, it's hilarious. I'm just mad.
But they have the council meeting. And things go, I guess, okay. It's almost like laissez-faire almost, where just nothing gets resolved. It's almost like modern politics where it's just a gridlock.
We're like, oh, well, we're at a gridlock, so I guess we're done here. Like, I guess that's what happens, but I don't see how that's meaningfully different than if they just voted for Grover to not be banished. Like that, because he wasn't. So he's fine. Well,
I think the vote comes down to pretty much if he's going to be banished, that means they're pretty much going to execute him. And how good can he be without a head?
Probably not very. So yeah, if they just dismiss the issue, then it's basically the same thing, right? It says exile the traitor. I think they would have just made him leave, but still, not great.
But what's it going to be, like the 10-mile spank train like in SpongeBob?
Exactly,
yeah.
Oh
my God. No, unless in the next book they're going to have the Cloven Inquisition. There's going to have a bunch of, the Spanish Inquisition with all these Cloven elders. Oh, God. This is terrible.
I love how Dionysus appears, drops some truth, then demands some peeled grapes. Like, that's a real move on his part. Just being like, it sounds like just the sort of thing Pan would do. Grover's right. The search is tiresome. You must start thinking for yourselves. He turned to a satyr. Bring me some peeled grapes right away. Yes, sire. The satyr scampered off. Like, all right, power move.
Well, yes. And also, I love what he's wearing. He's pretty much wearing like a black suit with like a grape purple tie, and I love it. He just looks so dapper, but also
still his weird face.
I like that you have like this urgency to him, but also he still doesn't care. He only cares about the little things in life, I guess. Like a god's dead. And it's interesting because then you have more of the stuff of everyone's like eating in the amphitheater. Everyone's just sad. Percy's sad. Tyson's sad. Tyson actually gets a little bit of redemption. He talks to Briars about, hey, you're going to go to the forges. You're going to help us out. Here's some directions, but most importantly, Percy sees Nico's leaving through the spooky woods. It's almost like in Snow White with the spooky woods.
There's always a spooky woods. That's obligatory. You gotta have a spooky
Well, especially
woods.
for the son of Hades, the spooky woods, everything is just spooky.
Right, he has to be shrouded in darkness at all times. Though actually, Nico isn't up to any funny business. He's just sort of actually being somewhat responsible.
Actually, no, that's not true. He's up to some funny business because when Percy Jackson finds him, he was saying goodbye to Bianca.
I guess, but like, you know what I mean? He's not doing some sort of creepy duplicitous thing. He's just like saying goodbye to Bianca and then being like, all right, well, I'm leaving now.
Well, he's not like wearing like a red cloak and has like a teddy bear and a pentagram going, "Hail Satan!" Not like that. He's not going to do any of that stuff. But I like how they actually, Percy and Nico have like a really interesting heart to heart.
Yeah, this is an interesting conversation because I guess in the beginning of this book, you really start to think, oh, is Nico going to become a villain or are they going to be like enemies in some way? Yeah, and then this conversation kind of dismisses that idea. Like, oh, I'm going to try and find the so Percy says, "When will you go?" I asked. "Right away. I've got tons of questions, like who was my mother? Who paid for Bianca and me to go to school? Who was the lawyer guy who got us out of the Lotus Hotel? I know nothing about my past. I need to find out." "Makes sense," I admitted, "but I hope we don't have to be enemies." He lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry I was a brat. I should have listened to you about Bianca."
Yes, and this is great character motivation. It's a great character arc because beginning of this book, Nico is insufferable. Like, I hate Nico in the beginning of this book.
He's the worst.
He is the worst.
Sometimes characters that are new are worse.
Well, even that, but also I think the problem though is they made him like super emo kid where everywhere he goes there's just a rain cloud over his head.
Right. Yeah,
And
no, he
here's
was really bummed out.
And also the trope of like when you become an emo kid, you think you have the world figured out, so now you're automatically a small adult. Like, man, everything sucks. I know the world. I'm only 14 years old. And it's funny because they bring that up because the crux of the story is Percy Jackson finally gives Nico the one thing Bianca lost her life for. And that was the little statue of Hades.
Right.
And it's funny because like, oh, I don't play with that stuff. And Percy's like, I just want to read this because it's great.
Oh yeah, the power level or whatever.
Yeah. Nico hesitated. "I don't play that game anymore. It's for kids." "It's got 4,000 attack points," I said coaxily. 5,000, Nico corrected. "But only if the opponent attacks first," I smiled. "Maybe it's okay to still be a kid once in a while." I tossed him the statuette. Nico studied it in his palm for a few seconds and slipped it into his pockets. "Thanks." For some reason, every time it cuts to Nico, his hair just gets progressively longer over his eyes.
The emo just escalates. I mean, actually, this isn't his most emo moment. It's his most like sort of like weird nerd-splain moment. It's very like worst mytho-magic symbol ever or something.
Well, no, he's the emo kid that still likes watching Death Note and anime.
Mm-hmm.
He's still nerdy.
I could see that. He's the overlap of nerd and emo.
Well, no, it's a very fine line. It's, the path to being a nerd is a fine line between being an emo kid and being a brony.
Yeah, and the exact overlap is Dungeons and Dragons or similar role-playing type games.
Yeah, oh yeah, I play Dungeons and Dragons a lot. But I like this moment just because it adds more humanness to Nico. And what Rick Riordan likes to do a lot of in his books is he has these little moments that make them more three-dimensional than just people on a page at most. Like, this is a very human moment. I think every book so far has had a moment like this where people gain either some type of humanity or more depth in this way. And a lot of it has to do with Annabeth. Like, the first book is her, I'm going to give my parents a chance. I read their letter. I'm gonna go with them. As well as in the other one, it's Tyson's talking about how pretty much this is the only job I'm meant to do this. Where in the Ironclad ship, it's about to explode, and he's the only one that can do it. Even in Titan's Curse, it's a mixture between Thalia and Percy when they're having their conversation in the rail car, or Percy talking to Zoe before she's about to die and talking about Anilakis, Riptide. Like, there's a lot of moments like this that Rick Riordan does a lot of, and he does them really well in this, where you have depth, where characters kind of have like a heart-to-heart, but also it isn't goofy. It can be goofy, but it's not entirely goofy.
It's sort of goofy, but it's like self-aware in its goofiness, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what Rick Riordan does really well in his books is he gives heart to characters. I think that's the most important thing. Even at the end of this chapter, he gives Dionysus a heart. he gives Chris Rodriguez a heart. He gives Clarice a heart that you're surprised about, but she has a heart.
Well, yeah, I mean, Chris Rodriguez already had a heart. He just was sort of the equivalent of when PETA gets hijacked in the Hunger Games. Spoiler alert.
Oh, man. I thought you said it's more as callous as like a person eating so many McDonald's that they just have a heart attack type of, oh, he's got a heart, but it's not a good pumper as it used to be.
Yeah. Well, I guess he was portraying them before that because he was working with Luke, but...
Oh, he's reverse PETA.
Yeah. It's true. He kind of did... It's a similar thing, though, because he was also, like, he was similarly, like, stupefied by the labyrinth in the same way. It's, like, a comparable kind of character. Anyway.
So Nico disappears into the spooky woods because he's going to go train with the undead as metal AF as possible. Clearly, they will teach me a good couple lessons. I mean, they're dead. What's the worst that could happen? Well, I mean, there's a reason why some of them are dead.
Yeah, because that really worked out when he was taking lessons from Minos, right?
Totally.
That was definitely smart.
I'm sure the person at McDonald's still loves him. I'm sure that person at McDonald's that kept giving McDonald's Happy Meals to Nico, hey, that's that emo kid that keeps coming in and getting unhappy meals.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, I liked this scene. It was sweet. I'm glad that he and Percy are maybe not the best of friends, but they've sort of reconciled.
They're acquaintances, if you want to use a big boy adult term. When they're not right your friends, but you still kind of somewhat talk to them, they're acquaintances.
They're like on good terms, I guess you'd say. They're not like the closest, but I think that, I mean, obviously it's a big difference from the beginning of the book where you think, oh, well, maybe Nico is going to be turned to the
dark
cause
side.
Yeah, exactly, the cause of Luke and the Titans and all that, and that's not the case at the end of this. So that's a win, even if he's still an emo little pain in the ass.
If I wanted to give a pretty much like a brief summary of this, is everyone gets a little win. Except for the dead people. Everyone gets a little win.
Yeah, it's true. They don't win so much, and neither does Dionysus, I guess, because his kid doesn't.
Well, he doesn't give a win, but he gives someone else a win, which makes him feel better.
That's true. He does help. He actually gives two people. Well, no, he gives two people a win. Because he helps out with
Grover.
Council of Cloven Elders, and then he helps out with Clarice, which we'll talk about basically right now, because that's what happens right after the Nico exchange in the woods.
Like a spooky jump scare, Dionysus is just behind.
Dionysus appears out of nowhere.
Yeah, just vines and stuff, and he's just like, Perseus Jackson. For some reason, his eyes are cross-eyed.
Yeah, there's something really funny about the way he appears, where it says, a voice right behind me said, "There goes a very troubled young man." I turned and found Dionysus standing there still in his black suit. "Walk with me," he said. "Where to?" I asked suspiciously.
Oh, next to this fully dug grave that I just made. Get in.
Yeah, I understand his lack of confidence in Dionysus, even though he's been uncharacteristically nice.
Well, I mean, I think he's in mourning, so he's just trying to be nice.
Well, he'll talk a little bit about some of his quote-unquote niceness motivations. So they go on a little walk. And who do we see but some characters that we maybe didn't forget about, but we kind of put them on the back burner that was sort of introduced in the beginning of this book, some of the drama that was happening there.
We reached the amphitheater and Dionysus pointed towards the campfire. Clarice was sitting shoulder to shoulder with a big Hispanic kid who was telling her a joke. It was Chris Rodriguez, the half-blood who had gone insane in the labyrinth. I turned to Dionysus. "You cured him? Madness is my specialty. It's quite simple. But you did something nice? Why?" He raised an eyebrow. "I am nice. I simply ooze niceness, Perry Johnson. Haven't you noticed?" It's such a great, well-constructed joke.
That was a great Dionysus line, honestly. That was pretty funny.
Well, because he's nice. He says he oozes niceness, and then is a jerk. Am I calling him the wrong name again?
Well, yeah, then his justification says, perhaps I felt grieved by my son's death. Perhaps I thought this Chris boy deserved a second chance. At any rate, it seems to have improved Clarice's mood. Why are you telling... I love that Percy's like, why are you telling me this? And the wine god sighed, "Oh, Hades if I know. But remember, boy, that a kind act can sometimes be as powerful as a sword. As a mortal, I was never a great fighter or athlete or poet. I only made wine. The people in my village laughed at me. They said I would never amount to anything. Look at me now. Sometimes small things can become very large indeed." That feels almost ominous.
No, I think, why isn't this a quote that should be put on all those, like, love, laugh, pray type of, like, mom things?
Yeah, no, exactly. It does feel a little bit like something that would be embroidered in a white lady's home, I understand. And it would have, like, vines and a some grapes.
Bless this mess.
Embroidered. Bless this mess.
The doctor said I can only have 1 cup of wine a day and just a gigantic cup.
I'm just picturing... Actually, yeah, can we think for a second about Dionysus as a wine mom? Like, he has a bunch of, like, signs that say stuff like, I like to cook with wine, sometimes I even put it in the food. And he has just, like, a shirt that says, bless this mess, and it's, like, an embroidered sweater. This is a great headcanon. I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah, he has one of those, like, live, laugh, love, drink type of, like, signs you get at Michael's.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah, signs you get at, Christmas tree shop.
Yes, El Chape. No, he seems like a total, like, wine mom. Like, he probably hangs out with all the Karens. And the Monicas and the Moniques of the world.
Yeah, they're probably a fan of him.
That brings a smile to my face.
Anyway, that's a weird, silly sidetrack for kind of an emotional scene. Chris is back to normal, and that kind of was so easily solved. It's weird. I understand why he's able to. It's just interesting, just like his arc, because you're introduced to him. You're like, he betrayed us. It doesn't matter, though, because his brain is broken by the labyrinth. And then you go chapters and chapters without really actively thinking about him. And then he's introduced again, and he's been cured by Dionysus, who's also been missing for a long time. Dionysus literally Deus Ex Machinas a lot of the stuff in this chapter, actually, where he appears and he's like, all right, well, yeah, the Council of Cloven Elders, I'm going to fix that. The thing with Clarice and Chris Rodriguez, I'm going to fix that whole situation. Like, he's really swooping in and saving the day in a way that you don't anticipate him to.
And that's fine, because he's a god and he can do kind of godly things, but also...
It's true. I mean, he truly, Deus Ex Machina, he is the Deus in Deus, you know, like, he's the god.
Well, yes, and also, what are you going to give for the wine god? Because he's not allowed to drink because this is a kid's book and you don't want to have boozed up god. You have to give him some type of weird thing where he can interrupt people. He gets to be rude. He's pretty much like the grumpy curmudgeon. Like, he's like the Ebenezer Scrooge. He likes being curmudgeon-y, and that's kind of like one of the reasons why I like him is he knows who he is, and he just enjoys being grumpy and crotchety. He's like the Emperor in Star Wars.
Yeah, he's curmudgeonly.
The reason why I like the Emperor in Star Wars is because he loves being evil, and I love that.
Yeah, I don't think Dionysus loves being evil. I think he kind of doesn't really care either way, usually.
He loves not caring. That's what I'm trying to say. That's one of the reasons why I like the Emperor, and this is why I like Dionysus. He knows what he loves, and he loves what he does.
Yeah. He's living his truth. I really like this chapter as a Dionysus chapter, because he doesn't necessarily redeem himself, because he never did anything that horrible, I guess, unless you think back to like when he was sort of helpful to Tantalus back in the day. But in general, he's felt sort of chaotic, neutral in a lot of ways.
No, B, I think what this chapter does is it gives him a humanity. Like, you're so used to gods being godly, and you see him now doing nice things, even though we know his personality, he's doing like a 180. It's nice. I think he even says it in this chapter. He pretty much line for line, oh, Hades, if you knew. But remember, boy, that a kind act can sometimes be as powerful as a sword. He pretty much is like, I will do this kind act and it'll help me feel better. My son's dead. It's weird because you think about, this is the first time in Percy Jackson where a god actually sees the repercussions of his son dying, or a god or goddess. This is the first time we've ever seen this. And like how they react to it. We've had Hermes kind of reacting to Luke going bad, but you've never seen a father or a mother, grieving off the loss of a kid. I mean,
that's true.
I mean, who would love Dionysus? That's a story that I'd love to read one of these days.
Right, his whole backstory. I mean, that's like a whole thing.
Well, no, his whole love backstory, like how he gets to have a child.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other can of worms, as they say.
Oh no, he fell in love with a Karen.
That's true, and then they loved wine so much.
Yes. Wait, you love wine? I love wine. And she pulls out like those like novelty-sized wine glasses. Fill her up.
Yeah, a big wine glass that has like a chain on it so you can wear it around your neck.
Yes, exactly. Or no, it's like those like decorative like wine glasses. Like the ones that are like 80 feet tall.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, just fill up. Like that. There you go. There's the backstory. Their mom was a Karen.
That makes more sense than anything, honestly. Well, I mean, well, like, isn't it... Hold on. Well, I know that he, like, was with Ariadne, right? But that's not, like, the parent.
Well, this is recently. He had twins recently in the last 17 years.
Right, yeah, that's true. It was, like, some other mortal person.
Yes. They probably met at like an arts and crafts fair or Zumba.
I mean, I buy it.
I like Dionysus. Out of all the gods so far, he's not the worst.
No, he's not. I think in some ways he's more down to earth. In some ways he's more insufferable because he like more actively affects their day to day. So sometimes he's pretty.
He's also the party god. Like, what can you do with him? The problem though is, what can you do with a character like in a kid's novel where you can't see him openly drinking, you can't see him doing the other thing that he's most famous for doing, except that you can have vines and turn people into dolphins and make people go nutso.
Yeah, I guess like they had to focus on some sort of fatal personality flaw because they couldn't focus on his other more what's the word I'm looking for, like sort of like bacchanal, like he wants to just have fun and have a good time and do a lot of like hedonistic things, and that doesn't necessarily translate well to a kid's book.
Well, it won't translate well because it's like Rick Riordan's like writing, I'm going to write this kid's story, and Dionysus lives the bohemian lifestyle.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I can't write that.
Yeah, no, that might not work out.
But I do like how this chapter ends out with Percy and Dionysus in the background.
Yeah, on a nice little note. It starts pretty major, right? This chapter gets a little dark, and then it ends on kind of a sweet note, a kind of a positive note.
Well, I like it because it's Dionysus and Percy are off in the background, and they see that Clarice and Chris Rodriguez are holding hands in the darkness. The chapter starts with death and ends with love.
Yeah.
Or I guess life.
Sunrise, sunset, etc., etc. Yeah, I do think that was like a nice little button on things. Though...
Love, laugh, pray.
The next chapter, I have a feeling it's going to do its typical Percy Jackson thing of being like, haha, you thought the story was over, but there's one more intense thing that happens before it ends, and that's my guess, probably.
But don't you mean that's not how the story goes?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's happened enough times that I've gotten used to it where it's like you get lulled into a sense of security, and then Rick is like, haha, I tricked you.
And you just have a bunch of people humming in the back of a car with a catchy tune.
Yeah.
So B, what is the name of the last chapter of the Battle of the Labyrinth?
The next and last chapter is chapter 20, My Birthday Party Takes a Dark Turn.
Oh no, B, is it going to be like the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones?
Oof. So his birthday party's at the end of summer, right?
Yes, B. That's when he turned 16.
It's like when they leave camp. Oh, right, that too. Oh, geez. All right, well, nice knowing you folks. I mean, we kind of determined that he's not the kid from the prophecy that was in...
Do you know that for certain?
Yeah. We don't know that. Well, also, it's like, then we've talked about prophecies where, like, are they a specific person in mind, or do you just need to fulfill the parameters and then it happens, or like, how does it work?
It's process of elimination. It's either Thalia, Nico, or Percy. And two of them aren't old enough.
Right. That's true. No, well, you mean Nico and Percy?
No, Nico and Thalia.
No, but Clarice is, or no, sorry, not Clarice. Talia is technically 16, right?
Nope, she's one day before turning 16. She'd have to disavow being with Artemis.
Oh, right, duh, of course, because she does that. So she can't ever be 16.
No.
I got that. So it can't be her. And I mean, it could be. Yeah, Nico's confusing because I don't actually know his age.
And I mean, he's older. Like, if you're looking by, like, the day he was conceived and he was a baby.
Right, because he's been, yeah.
So,
but
not 16.
I don't know how it works.
Not 16. Percy's 16. And B, this is going to sound really surprising, but what's the name of this book?
The Battle of the Labyrinth, you mean?
No, what's the other name of this book?
Percy Jackson?
Oh my God, Percy Jackson.
Because he's the main character. So
My birthday takes a dark turn. Oh no.
Oh, jeez. I mean, I really don't want him to be the chosen one. I know he has to be.
Do you want it to be like a Neville Longbottom situation?
Well, I mean, but yeah, that Harry still ends up being the chosen one, though. But yeah, I guess it's sort
No,
of...
he doesn't. It's technically not. It's actually Neville.
Oh, it's okay, right. It's technically the Neville. Okay, I don't know enough about Harry Potter, but it's sort of like... I mean, I think it does function that way. The prophecy where, like, you could technically be a part of the prophecy as long as you fulfilled the parameters. So it could have been anyone. In this case, as far as we know...
No, it has to be of the big three.
It has to be... Well, I'm saying it could have been anyone who fits the parameters. So it could have been Talia if she didn't stop herself from aging. It could have been Nico if he was the right age. But it has to be Percy, I guess.
Here's the problem with that, B. We don't know the prophecy. We only know that one tidbit.
That's true. I often forget that.
No one has said...
There's also a lot of other stuff.
The only thing we've known about this big prophecy is it's a person of the big three that is turning 16. That's all we know. We don't know what the rest of the rhyme is.
Yeah, we could be missing out on a lot. I don't know.
And their birthday takes a dark turn, so who knows what will happen. I'm scared. You're scared. We're all screaming. Everyone calm down. Stop screaming.
Mom, I'm scared. Can you take me home?
Oh my God. No, stop, please. Don't touch me. I'm scared.
We'll see, I guess.
So, B, do you want to read some listener emails?
Yeah, let me just get them up. The first one is from Liam, who says, "Hey, Zack and B, it's me, Liam, with 3 important pieces of information. First, the subject of vines was brought up in the last episode, and if you want some very funny vines, look up Thomas Sanders on YouTube. You will not regret it." I'm familiar with his vines.
I'm very familiar with Thomas Sanders.
He's pretty popular, actually, before Vine was murdered.
The official ginger Disney princess, yeah.
Yeah, I think, he has YouTubes.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's Meredith, so I guess he's the ginger prince.
Second, the way that you pronounce the name of the seal dog creatures is Telekini. Telekini.
Teleniki? Is it?
Well, we're done with this book, so I don't know how much they're going to mention them in the next book, but...
Can I just call them seal puppy dogs, man?
I don't know. Sea dogs?
New Guinea?
Yeah, the next part is redacted. But there's a PS that says, the reason the children of the big 3 don't always use their big powers, like creating small hills, for instance, or making volcanoes erupt, is it takes a certain amount of energy to use them, so if they use them all the time, they would kill themselves like in the Aragon books. I'm familiar with the concept of the Aragon books, but other than that...
See, with the Aragon books, it's a little different, because you get that established within the text.
Right, they don't make it
Jackson,
clear.
We don't have that established in the text, yeah.
I guess he's, like, exhausted afterwards. That's, like, canon that it happens. But, yeah, even the same thing... You know what? You're right, though. It's not made explicit in the text, but it is implied. Because every time that... When Percy made the volcano geyser thing, and then he ends up on the island with Calypso, he's totally exhausted. And then when... Nico does the thing in the woods when they're fighting all the monsters from the labyrinth, then he like overexerts himself and is like drained of energy. So I could see that. That seems like a pretty well-established part of the lore. So I don't know. Sure. Why not? That makes as much sense as anything else.
Yeah, that seems like a good theory. It chills. Yeah. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've watched Aragon. Oh no, people are gonna start yelling at me. I've watched Aragon. I've read Aragon. The movie's terrible, but the books, I don't know. I have like a love-hate relationship with that author, and I'll leave it at that. I had a bad experience with him.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I know that the author, when he wrote it, was like a child, so that's complicated.
Well, no, his mom got it published.
Yeah, it's a whole weird thing.
Even though it's Star Wars and Lord of the Rings with dragons. And don't say it's not, because it is. I'll fight you all about this. There's plenty of articles about it. I got plenty of evidence. So we did get another email that says, "Hi, I'm William. Don't know if you remember me, but I want to thank you guys a lot. You motivate me when I do book work and the other performance tasks because I am homeschooled. I hate school. I also want to thank you because when my uncle died, you guys gave me a way to feel better and made me laugh and being cringy. And also, I'm on the episode The Gods Want to Kill Us, and I'm so happy that you guys read my emails. Thank you." And there's
Thanks
a bunch of smiley
emails.
faces. If I could rate your podcast, I would rate it 10 out of 5. Wow, that's actually a compliment. Oh, man. So, yeah, thank you guys for taking the time to read this, and bye. So sorry for the long email. Oh, no.
Oh, geez. Here we go.
P.S. I ship you two. Mwahahaha. Sorry if I'm making you cringe. 1,000 smiley faces. From William, one of your thousands of fans. Keep staying mortal. This is not the first time this has happened.
Don't ship us, please.
Don't.
I'm kindly
B's
asking.
like the sibling that... Actually, you know what? I'm like the Uncle Buck of B's friends. I come in like the... Are you okay there, B?
Why is that so accurate?
Oh, I'm the Uncle Buck.
Well, you do sometimes have a John Candy energy that I can't quite articulate, especially actually sometimes we have a real trains, planes, and automobiles kind of energy where I'm Steve Martin and you're John Candy.
Yes, but I have that very calming Canadian sensibilities about myself.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm like the neurotic one. Please do not. I'm asking nicely to not
Please
ship
don't
us.
ship
I'm
us.
in a relationship and I don't. Zach is like a brother to me.
B is already in a relationship and I can't break that oath pact. And also, I don't think of B in that way plus a billion. So
We're like buddies. We're like siblings. We're not like that. I'm sorry to like burst your bubble, but like don't do that, please.
it's actually kind of funny because this is a thing that happens to a lot of podcasts where people think co-hosts.
I think it's just like, oh wow, these people get along.
I hope they start dating.
Also, like, that would be a kind of a miserable relationship because we live on opposite sides of the country.
Well, no, long distance relationships work, but just imagine.
I mean, I've done long distance. It's not fun.
No, okay, the devil's advocate time. Just imagine if we were to date and we broke up. This would be the most awkward podcast.
That would also be a bad thing. Yeah, there's many reasons why it's bad. It's a lasagna of bad.
Everybody, it benefits us just being friends. I'm sorry, B. It's not you. It's our thousands of fans, and also me.
Yeah. Yeah, and also me. And probably my boyfriend has a say in this.
B, it's okay. You can break up with me right now. It's okay.
Yeah. If you love something, let it go.
My heart. Okay, time to go on 4chan. Talk about terribleness.
You're free now.
Well, B, time to become an incel. See ya, everybody.
Oh, geez.
What's our next email, B?
Your villain origin story. The next email is from Amelia.
Amelia Bedelia?
I don't think it's Amelia Bedelia, or else she would have written a very literal email, to which she says, "Hey, Zack and B, sorry if this gets long, but I don't really care. You guys have the only podcast I listen to, except for Nightmare on Fear Street. You make me think about things I would never..." Yeah, that's a throwback. "I would never think about when I read Percy Jackson. I hate rereading books unless they're good, and I get bored when I do. You help me basically not need to reread, and love your commentary. Can't wait for the next book coming September 24th, 2019. I already pre-ordered, but enough about me. I love how you say that Rachel Elizabeth Dare being a serial killer. I read the Alchemist? Is it just Alchemist with a Y?
Yeah, the
recently,
Alchemist.
And there's a character called Virginia Dare, and all I can think of is Rachel. This part mostly for Zach, but I'd love if you continue Nightmare on Fear Street. I listen on Spotify and hope you get this. I only have one question. If you could make a different story for Rachel Elizabeth Dare, what would it be? I would have her dad be a serial killer. Thank you for giving us your funny personalities and fun remarks, Amelia."
Yes, Rachel Elizabeth Dare. Didn't you know her last name actually is Rachel John Wayne Gacy Dare? What would yours be? I feel like if it's going to be a kid's
we've
scenario.
already said that it's a businessman.
So you want him to be
I
Donald
guess that would
Trump?
be Bundy? I know. I mean, it would actually make sense if he was Donald Trump, is the thing. That's the horrifying thing, is canonically, it could easily be him. She has red hair. She lives in New York. He's an evil businessman who wants to destroy the planet. It's only more horrifying that he's president, really. That's would be a really fascinating book about my horrible president dad who wants to kill the earth, and I'm friends with this satyr who wants to save it. That could be a whole side story.
I don't remember this Disney Channel original movie.
My Date with the President's Daughter.
For me, I feel like it would be more interesting if he was like a huge humanitarian, like he works for FEMA or something, where he just does so much good in the world, where Rachel doesn't know what to do. And that's where Pan is like, hey, don't compare yourself to your dad. Compare yourself to yourself.
Oh, right. So it's sort of like the character in The Good Place where her sister keeps doing good and outdoing her.
Yes. Well, in all honesty, I'd end up in The Bad Place, but that's a different story. I like that. And to answer your question about Nightmare on Fear Street, unfortunately, I don't have any plans of reviving the show anytime soon. Meg is off in UK. I'm pretty sure working for Pixar at this point. She's been very, very busy with her degree. I think it's her master's degree in animation, which takes many, many years.
So much effort.
Yes. And it's been hard. I haven't talked to her in a hot minute because she's always super busy. So I got one from Vanya that says, last week's chapter was super, super cool. The way you guys approached it, I'm currently taking English in my junior year, and the way you guys analyze it was exactly the way we've been analyzing Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. It helped me see Battle Labyrinth in a whole new light and how Annabeth shares a lot of similarities with the grandma from that book, because there's a huge anagram, and I don't even know what it is because I'm dyslexic right now. Both of them are extremely confident.
It's almost like I'm a lit major or something.
Both of them are extremely confident in the worldview and have a hard time adjusting and not getting in their way. I think the biggest similarity in the way Annabeth almost worships Luke and refuses to accept that he's a terrible person, and the way that Grandma describes the plantation almost like the Garden of Eden, even though it was a horrible place and also in the period in its history. Keep staying mortal, Alex.
Wow, I actually never read that book. I've wanted to read Flannery O'Connor because I know that it's Southern Gothic and I like that genre. Well, you know what? I say I like that genre, but I really just like To Kill a Mockingbird. I really didn't like Faulkner that much, but is he Southern Gothic or just Southern pretentious? Hard to say.
Column A, column B. I think when it comes to us, when it comes to literary analysis, the way that our show approaches things are a little differently. Because one, we're approaching it from, I've read the books, you have not, but also both of us read a metric crap ton of books. Like, have you seen my bookshelves? And I also read a lot of like fantasy. I read a lot of genre. So when you look at things from a different perspective and also going beyond the genre that you like, it's very interesting. But also for me, I like listening to people talk about books. So when I hear people talk about books, it makes me, when I reflect doing our podcast, is a little different because I never had an experience doing education that way, of like you be with like English that way. Mine was always breaking down structure.
I can't escape it.
You can't escape it. Like me, I looked at scripts, and we have to, the way that you break down scripts is a little different than breaking down the metaphor. For me, when I was a stage manager, was you read the script and you break down, okay, what can we do in these elements? Where can we have our lighting changes? Where can we have our sound? When are special effects coming? Like, I'm looking at it, I'm deconstructing it in a different media while you're deconstructing things in like the writer's intent at times.
Yeah, I think because you're kind of more into, I mean, we both have the overlap of being into literature, but because your experience is also a lot of times in like theater or like stage production and that kind of thing, you're often really involved in like breaking down how things are structured, and I'm more like, let's analyze this character's feelings. And it really works out.
That's actually the exact same way, like, you read a piece of dialogue, like, you look at something like Shakespeare, like Romeo and Juliet, like, what is it, Rose by Any Other Name? Like, you look at that, and I have to, like, doing stage direction or watching the director, like, okay, we really want you to emphasize these words because this is how she's feeling. You want it to be like, there's
overlap for sure.
There is overlap, yeah. I think that's what works for us, but also we aren't spending like 16 hours talking about ships. Thank you, everyone. I'm here all weekend. Oh no, I'm getting so much hate mail. It's like in Harry Potter, all the angry letters are like going everywhere. It's Sunday. Oh no.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's like overlap in our approaches, but I guess the difference is like we both like to really break apart and analyze things, but like maybe I'm more into looking at like metaphor and things like that, where you're just sort of like, oh, well, like, let's just like literally look at what's on the page and what it means. Well, I'm like, well, it could represent this. And sometimes I'm wrong, but that's also kind of like what being a lit major is trying to like find significance where maybe sometimes there isn't, but it's just like your reading of it.
For me, I follow the Tolkien approach of I don't believe in metaphor all that much. Like, sometimes what's written on the page is blatantly just written on the page.
I mean, I agree. I have kind of a mixed opinion. It depends on what I'm reading. But the thing is, sometimes a metaphor isn't something that the author intended, but it's something that you can get from the text, and that can also be meaningful. You know what I'm saying?
No, I totally understand what you're saying, B. And I think that's why we work really well. And also, it's weird because neither of us have PhDs, but some people think of us as the main authority for Percy Jackson, even though I know a lot of things, but I don't know enough.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that's why we work, because you also sometimes break me out of my, like, lit major brain of just being like, but what about this? And then I get real conspiracy theorist about what it means and stuff, so.
Well, also because I know what's happening and I want to, like, nudge you towards certain answers.
That's true. Yeah, you do nudge me sometimes, and I appreciate that, because I cannot often get derailed. Okay, so we got one more email from Jake, who says, "Hey, Zack and B, my name is Jake JD, and I'm from the UK. I first read the Percy Jackson series over 10 years ago and have been a passionate fan ever since. I recently discovered your podcast whilst I was rereading the series for the 1000th time. I have quickly binge-listened to every episode over the last few weeks, leading to withdrawal issues, having to now listen to only an episode per week. I really appreciate B's commitment to not read ahead, it's difficult, as your alternative new insights on the series are great. However, the bombshell that Apollo was flirting with 8 to 11-year-old girls, the Hunters, was something somehow I never realized, and I'll never see those chapters in the same way again."
Oh man, that's like a bombshell.
Oh yeah, I forgot about when we talked about that. Anyway, I just wanted to write in to say thank you for giving a more mature literature look at a kid's book series. I've always found there is a stigma about children's literature, and I think people like you are fighting the good fight against that. Sorry for the long email. I'm a bit of a chatterbox. Thank you for staying mortal pals. Jake JD. P.S. Please read the Kane Chronicles before Heroes of Olympus. Controversial, I know, as it's far better and will fit better than Heroes of Olympus to the one chapter a week structure you've established and will be a good change of pace. Oh, now we're torn.
Oh man, it's gonna be a civil war. We'll figure something out. We do have some plans for what's coming up next, and we'll figure out what we're gonna do. We will get there. We still have like many more weeks of this podcast before we finished The Last Olympian. We're not even going to be really starting to record The Last Olympian until mid-October when I'm in New York. So that'll be fun. If we're going to take place in New York B, we should just record in New York.
Yep, might as well.
This is an interesting email because someone does bring up a really good point about kids' books and children's literature. Like, we are fighting the good fight, but something that people don't really realize when it comes to kids' books is that authors are writing books that they wish they had for their kids sometimes. So There's a lot more adult themes, and sometimes when it comes to it, children's books can be just as adult fiction, because adult fiction can be boring. It's just a bunch of people complaining about their lives and their affairs, and it's kind of bad.
Yeah, I mean, we were just kind of talking about this, that, obviously you're going to read a book differently when you're older. Like, your perspective changes and everything. The interesting thing is I also didn't get the chance to read this as a kid. So, like, you get both perspectives of, like, how you felt about it when you were younger and then how you feel about it now. I sometimes wonder, like, how would I have a totally different opinion of the series if I read it when I was a kid? I probably would have been more into it, honestly, because I'm very critical, I think, sometimes. And it's not to say that I hate this series, because sometimes I get really mad about certain parts, or I'm frustrated about the way things are written, but I do appreciate what it's trying to do a lot of the time. But I do think sometimes, how would I have felt if I was a little 12-year-old and discovered these books instead of, unfortunate events, or alongside unfortunate events?
Well, then you'd have a different blog that was like, oh, I'm Leslie
I'm a
Dare.
demigod. Yeah, exactly.
You'd have something like dumb like that. I'm just imagining like in an alternate universe right now where you didn't read Series of Unfortunate Events, but you read Percy Jackson first, and Unfortunate Associates is the first time you reading on Series of Unfortunate Events.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this timeline isn't too far off from what my timeline is, and yet it feels so different.
I'm going to have to go to a different dimension where I have to solve this issue to figure out what went wrong and how that little change, like the butterfly effect, like I come back and all of a sudden we're being enslaved by our new ape overlords. What did I do? If B didn't read Series of Unfortunate Events first, we would be in an ape-free environment. Oh, look, there's a Statue of Liberty. I finally get to see it for the first time.
Yeah, it would just be like, it would be like the butterfly effect. It would echo out and change my whole personality, probably.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? You're probably sitting there right now in your Camp Half-Blood t-shirt complaining about Annabeth, Percabeth, talking about shipping. Oh, God, I gotta stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dark timeline.
It's a very dark timeline. But thank you so much for that lovely, lovely email. We didn't get any new iTunes reviews this week. I'm sure everyone's in school right now, and new people, it's kind of slow. But that's okay. So I wanted to update everybody about what's going to be happening soon. We're going to be finishing the Battle Labyrinth by next week, and we're going to change things up a little bit. This is going to be really weird, but so we're going to be doing the Demigod Files after we finish the Battle Labyrinth, and then we're going to do a little bit of an overview of the whole series, like what do we think about it so far, the themes, the general things that we like about it, And then once we get to October, there's going to be plenty of episodes. We're actually going to be taking a week off in October just because we are going to be so busy recording multiple episodes about the musical, recording a special secret episode, recording an episode with our fans, recording an episode of just us. And
yeah, it'll be all sorts of content.
Yes, it could be worse. We could also be doing an audio commentary for Sea of Monsters. Like, that's ever going to happen. Ha 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 ha.
He's broken, you guys. We broke him.
I don't want to read anymore. Okay. So B, where can they find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at bkellygorman, and you can find me on Tumblr at twinpoetry.tumblr.com. Oh, I just wanted to mention that I got a message from someone on Instagram about how my Instagram name is my full name and that I might be concerned about that. I know that, my name is Bryce. Like, it's fine. B is a nickname, but it's fine that you guys know.
Oh my gosh.
It's no big deal. Yeah.
What's next? So my name on Twitter... It's a good thing that my full name on Twitter actually exists, Zack Attack Sokol. My middle name actually is Attack.
So thank you for your concern, kind listener, but it's fine.
Everything's bueno. If you want to find me on Twitter, you can find me at Suda41. That's SUDA41. I do have my full name there, Zack Attack Sokol. If you want to tweet at the show, you can tweet us at halfblood_radio.
The middle name Attack from the old country.
Well, yes, actually, it's shortened, so it's Zackus Attackus Sokol.
Love. Zackus Attackus Sokolov.
Oh my god. No, it's Sokol. Sokolov is a different name. Sokol means falcon.
Oh, so it wasn't shortened, actually. I thought you said that it was.
I don't think it was. I might have said something and said something differently. I just read a book that my grandfather just published about the whole Sokol lineage. And it's just Sokol. I might have been wrong at the time. If I'd said it, I might have been wrong at the time, but I just read a whole book about my great-grandfather.
Well, now you know. Not everyone has the luxury of having a book about your family.
We also have a Patreon.com/Radio Camp Half-Blood. We're going to have early episodes. We're going to have a lot of the next month. There's going to be a gangbusters amount of episodes that are going to be early because we're not going to release them right away because it'd just be nutso-butso. We have t-shirts available at TeePublic. Just type in Radio Camp Half-Blood and you'll have some cool shirts. B, when is the meetup?
Okay, so our meetup is going to be on Friday, October 18th at the William Tecumseh Sherman Monument at 3:30 p.m. It starts at 3:30, ends at 5. You could show up right when it starts, any time in between that. We're just going to be hanging out. There might be some cool merch stuff. There might be some cool people.
It'll be a fun time. I'm excited for that. And it's going to be a great
I'm
time.
I hope the weather is good. Hopefully it will be. It'll be October, so.
B, if it's raining, I'm going to be there. If it's pouring, I'll also be there. But hopefully, for the love of gods, I hope that old man is snoring.
I thought you were going to launch into the the postal service, like no rain nor sleet nor snow kind of thing. Hopefully it's not snow, though there has been some freak incidents in October of snow.
B, this isn't Cheers. I'm not going to go to a bar dressed as a postman.
Yeah, you're not going to go full Cliff Cloven. Anyway, I hope you guys can make it. Please let us know. Try to RSVP on the Facebook event. You can search that, or you can just, if you're having trouble finding it, you can check out my Twitter. It's the pinned tweet, in that thread. You can find it there. You could message me. I'll link it to you. Yeah, you'll find it. I trust.
Yes, this was a very fun episode. I was really excited. I've talked about some dark things, talked about some light things, but we will see you guys next week. I'm Zach.
Yeah, for the last chapter.
Yes, for the final chapter. Then we have 24 more weeks of this because I think the last book has more chapters in it than our normal norm.
Can't wait. It's going to be great.
Gonna be exciting.
Anyway.
Well, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
And let's keep staying immortal. See ya!
Bye, guys.